The Raven Mocker. Have you ever heard of the Raven Mocker? My grandfather asked me, as a fire kissed his face, surrounded by the darkened living room. No, Grandpa. What is that? A Raven Mocker is a witch in Cherokee folklore that steals the life of the elderly to become younger. And I believe that is what is causing the deaths in our town. A witch? Grandpa, please, don't be ridiculous. There's no such thing as witches. You're too old to believe in such superstitions. Hold your tongue, boy. Don't you dare make fun of your heritage. Oh, please, Grandpa, I barely have any Cherokee in me. It doesn't matter how much or how little you have. Cherokee blood still flows through your body. And our family has always believed in the Raven Mocker. When I was a child, my great-grandfather would tell me stories of an old witch that preyed on his reservation when he was a small child. Fine, Grandpa. But why do you think there's a Raven Mocker here, causing these deaths? All 5 deaths have involved the elderly or the sick, and when their bodies were discovered, bits and pieces of their heart were lying next to their bodies, looking like it had been chewed upon. But there were no cuts or any markings on the flesh. It looked to the naked eye they died of natural causes. You see, grandson, the Raven Mocker consumes the hearts of their victims and leave no trace on the bodies. They move as a fiery object in the sky, followed by a strong wind. Both were seen and felt at each of the deaths. When you hear a raven's call, not long after, a death is sure to follow. Oh, Grandpa, this is all just too ridiculous. Look out the window. The trees are swaying back and forth. There's obviously a strong wind out. Is she coming? Oh, there's a lantern floating in the distance. There's the fiery light. Is she coming? Stop it, grandson. That's enough of your jokes. Oh, Grandpa, what is that I hear in the distance? Is that a raven calling? I guess she's almost here. Oh, Grandpa, you and your superstitions. It's just a regular night around here. Grandpa? What's wrong with Tabitha? Tabitha and I have been friends since we could barely walk. Our mothers had been friends since childhood, so we spent our entire lives growing up together. Not long after high school, Tabitha got pregnant by a guy named Bill, who we went to school with, and gave birth to a baby boy she named Ben. I'd never seen Tabitha so happy, so madly in love, but sadly, Bill did not treat her and the baby with equal love. No matter what I did or said, I could not get Tabitha to leave him, even though I knew what abuses were going on. During this time, Tabitha also became quite friendly with a girl named Ollie, a nurse she befriended while she was giving birth. Ollie seemed like an all-right enough girl. We would all hang out at Tabitha's house to try and cheer her up after one of the latest blow-ups with Bill. But there was just something about her that seemed off. The way she moved and talked, the things she would say, she was just very eerie. This continued until one day we were called over to Tabitha's house, and when she opened the door, we could tell Bill had done his worst this time. Tabitha let us in, limped to the couch, and we sat and talked, except for Ollie. She stayed absolutely silent. Tabitha proceeded to tell us what happened, and that he was shacked up at some roadside motel with some woman. The whole time we were there, Always just sat and listened. It looked like she was thinking of something, just sitting there, with a look that could kill. After a few hours, it was time to leave, but before we left, Always leaned over and whispered something into Tabitha's ear. I don't know what she said, but after a minute, Tabitha's face seemed to go blank. She looked pale. Always got up and walked out the door. I said goodbye to Tabitha, but she said nothing, just slowly waved goodbye. I chased after Always to ask what she whispered to Tabitha. She gave no reply. I angrily tried to ask again, but she moved so quickly she was at her car before I could finish the sentence. I looked at her through the window. It looked like she mouthed, "I'm ending this." Ending what? I thought. I jumped in my car and followed her. We drove and drove. It seemed like forever we were on the road. We're heading towards the highway. She's taking us towards the motel, I thought. She pulls over on the side of the road and gets out and heads into the woods. I pull over, get out and follow. I can see her heading towards a building at the end of the tree line. She's going the back way to the motel. I stop and watch her from behind one of the trees. She moved quickly to the room on the end. Bill's car is parked in front of the door. She kicked it open and jumped in. She was in there no more than 5 minutes when I heard the blood-curdling screams. I watched as Always jutted out of the room, covered in blood, heading back into the woods. She stopped right in front of the trees I was hiding behind. I looked down. Her feet were hooves. They were goddamn deer hooves. I know it. My grandfather 100% believes what I saw. Always was never seen again. And when I saw Tabitha and told her what I had seen, she laughed it off. She strangely didn't even care Bill was gone. A man who she defended over and over again, no matter what. She's changed. Something seems off. She's still sweet and caring, but there's something eerie about her. And for some reason, her legs are always covered now. If someone even gets near them, she bolts away. I dare not think it. What is happening to my friend? What is happening to Tabitha? Wendigo. A new town, another job. I nodded my head as the head of security for the minuscule Lockwood campus went through his new hire's speech. I could care less what he had to say, only chiming in when needed to secure the job. I last saw the beast heading this direction. All I had to do was wait for it to hopefully come here to feed once more. The first few nights were still. Jostling the small taser they had provided me, I'd make my rounds. Such a small town required nothing more in the sense of security, but I was always sure to never let my Glock leave my side. Not anymore. It was subtle, but I could tell each night that less students were making it back to campus. I had only hoped I picked a spot that the Wendigo would be drawn to. One filled with plenty of young, fresh bodies. That's when, on the 4th night, from my front desk, I could hear screaming down the hall. Standing up, I chambered around before heading towards the noise. I was sure it was the Wendigo. I stopped at a door that had large drawn-out carvings that led to the doorknob. A muffled yelp from behind it was all I needed to hear. It was time. I pushed on the door. As it creaked open, it revealed the Wendigo feasting on one of the college girls. Her body convulsed in pain as the flesh was being ripped from her face. At the sight of me, she attempted to reach out with the rest of energy she could muster. The Wendigo turned its head on a dime, examining me fiercely, clearly enraged at the idea of its meal being interrupted. It watched me further. Its ragged breathing met that of my heartbeat. I squeezed the trigger of the Glock as the sights lined up on his torso. I wasn't quick enough. The bullet had only grazed the beast as it leaped towards me, plunging his hand into my abdomen, curling his fingers around my lower rib cage. It snarled. Flooded with shock, I squeezed the trigger a few more times, this time nailing it in the chest. The Wendigo let out a screech, forcing me to drop my firearm as I was flung against the door. Rapidly, it convulsed on the ground for a few seconds before leaping through the window. Holding my bloodied abdomen, I got up, using the door as support. Stepping tenderly around the girl's body, I approached the window. In the distance, amongst the tree line, the Wendigo was looking back. It let out one more screech before fading into the darkness of the night. I couldn't help but smirk at how close I had gotten this time. Skinwalkers near me. This is real. I need to let people see this. I live in rural New Mexico, near dense forests, and I keep hearing laughter and screams. My name being called from the woods in my mom's voice, but she's in bed. The sun's currently setting. I need help. This is scary, and I don't know what to do. Please, give advice. Water babies from Native American lore. A water baby is a spirit, a ghoul, or a monster. Most of them agree, however, that a water baby is a Native American bred urban legend of small childlike creatures living in the waters of reservations around the western United States. This small creature has some specific characteristics that are sometimes conflicting in essence. Water babies, according to Native American lore, can be found at Massacre Rock State Park in Idaho and in Utah Lake, though one origin story is distinctly more upsetting. The Idaho water babies are believed to be the ghosts of young children that the starving people of the Shoshone tribe drowned in the river, choosing the death over one of starvation. It's said that if you sit at the rocks, you can still hear their cries. While some stories claim that the babies simply drowned, others posit that they adapted, grew gills, and have sworn revenge on the living. In Utah, water babies are believed to be another type of creature altogether. According to Weird US, these water babies were a type of dwarf that lived in the lake and mimicked the sounds of babies crying to drown unsuspecting people. Different water baby legends can be found in Nevada and California as well. The commonality between them all seems to be luring people into the lake to drown them. Chindi. There is a creature that they tell stories about in the American Southwest. The creature is called a Chindi. Usually, when someone sees a Chindi, it looks like a coyote walking on its hind legs, upright like a person. Chindis walk out of sight along lonely roads at night, waiting for travelers. It does not matter if the travelers are on foot or in a car. The Chindi will wait until the moment is right and cross the path of the traveler, just out of sight, trotting across the road on its hind legs. This is how the Chindi marks its victim. Once a Chindi crosses your path, it will follow you for weeks. It stalks the victim by creeping just out of sight and circling. You would never know it was stalking you, except for an occasional twig snap or a slight movement in the darkness. It is hard to know if you are being stalked by a Chindi. They say that a Chindi is a type of Skinwalker. It can look like a normal coyote or even a person. The only way to identify a Chindi is by its eyes. A Chindi's eyes always look the same, dull and deep. They won't always reflect light like a normal animal's eyes. Anyone who stares directly into the eyes of a Chindi becomes entranced. The person will stare into the eyes of a Chindi, slack-jawed, until the Chindi decides to look away. But by then, it is too late. A Chindi does not maul or eat its victims. After days or weeks of stalking, it will lay in wait, somewhere until the victim looks into its eyes. Chindis are very patient. They will wait in a location for hours until the victim glances right into its dull, empty eyes. Something happens then. The victim's spirit is totally consumed, and something else is left behind. A wise person might notice the small clues that he is being stalked by a Chindi. Twig snapping or a bit of movement just outside the shine of car headlights. Unfortunately, it is not a fate easily avoided. If someone tries to escape the Chindi by staying indoors at night, the Chindi will just stare in through a window until the victim happens to look out. In fact, this is a preferred method of the Chindi. It will wait outside the window at night, covered in just enough shadow that it won't be noticed, until someone is looking directly at it. Most people won't remember to avoid looking out the window when they wake up in the middle of the night. Even if you do remember to beware of the Chindi, it's difficult to resist the impulse to peek when there could be something just outside the window, just to make sure nothing's there. Just a quick glance. Indigo Woods. I need to talk to you about Timothy Logan. The private eye dropped that sentence and stood on it, waiting for a reaction. I adopted a poker face. Too late. I realized that a blank face is as good as an admission. Timmy's been dead for 20 years. What could I possibly know about it? Dead? I thought he disappeared into Indigo Woods. 20 years is a long time to be gone. Timmy's dead. But Timothy's uncle isn't, and he wants to know what happened. So we're opening the cold case and seeing what falls out. You were the last one to see him before he vanished. Memories bubbled up to the surface. 2 decades of suppression and denial melted away. I sighed. Listen, Indigo Woods is a weird place. You look at a map, it looks like 30 square miles of greenery wedged up to the Appalachian Mountains. But then you get inside it, and listen, detective, there are 5 streams that run parallel through the woods, north to south. They shift course based on rainfall and snow melts. It's really easy to misjudge where you are. The trees are thick enough that you can't see the mountains when you're a stone's throw away from them. Iron deposits nearby make your compass worthless. You can get lost really easily in there. Shit, man. People were getting lost in those woods since before the Mayflower docked. Even the name, Indigo Woods. There's nothing blue in there. It's a corruption of Wendigo, a monster from Native American myths. You're starving to death. You eat your buddy. Boom. You're Wendigo. The local tribes warned the colonists these woods were filled with Wendigos from all the lost souls. I cut myself off. I was clenching my fists and almost hissing. I got a hold of myself. I wiped my brow free of sweat, trying for nonchalance. So Tim Logan walked in, got lost, and that's the end of it, huh? The detective asked. And the searchers never found a trace? The searchers didn't try, man. All the locals know about Indigo Woods. The adults, they walked around near the edge and shouted for an hour or two, then went home. Listen, I begged him. I got lost right alongside Timmy. We split from each other. No idea how. One second I'm clutching a school bag. Next second I'm all alone out there. It was part sundown. Little slivers of moonlight cut through the trees. I huddled up by the trees. I heard, "Timothy Logan?" the detective asked. I shook my head violently. No, I thought. That sure as hell wasn't Timmy I heard. I got lucky. Picked a direction and walked. Timmy must have gone the other way. I'm sorry. I can't help you. Later, when he'd left, I stared out my front porch at Indigo Woods as the sun went down. Nothing came out the woodline. I locked my doors and went to bed. Traumatized by a Native American demon. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, I was running around in my grandparents' backyard, doing my usual thing, lifting up rocks to see what kind of bugs I could find, before putting them all together in a little plastic container where they'd eventually eat each other. Butterflies, centipedes, fire ants, human cruelty at its funniest. I'm sure this makes me look a bit like an asshole of a protagonist, but again, I was 9. Now if I find a spider in my house, I carefully wrap it in a Kleenex and place it gently outside. During my travels that day, I found something strange under a pile of rocks near the creek bank. An old skeleton key jutting out from behind 2 incredibly heavy rocks. Bronze and rusted, it looked like something out of a 30s silent horror film. I remember showing it to my grandma and vividly recall her being very unenthusiastic about it. I'd find out why soon. I stayed over the night and slept in my usual space, their second bedroom. I sat it on the dresser before bed, and Grandma read me a story from an old book she'd always recite for me, kiss me, and finally turned off my lights on the way out. I fell asleep, and some inordinate amount of time later, woke up with a really strange feeling. The windows in the room were shut, but it was too cool out for air conditioning, and yet, swirling around the room was a violent gust of wind. I suddenly got the sinking feeling that something was in there with me. It was the first time in my life I felt vulnerable and in danger, and of all places, in the comfort of my bedroom. I could hear a squeaking sound somewhere in the room, and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw the fake hanging plants swinging feverishly on their own. My grandma came running in. Before I could tell her what had happened, something terrifyingly creepy occurred. She began running around the room, looking in the closets and under the bed, even as I screamed that it was only wind. It was like she was looking for something or someone, but wouldn't tell me. Eventually, she accepted that it was a nightmare, and though I maintained it wasn't, she told me to get some sleep. I hadn't thought about it until after she left. Just at that moment, I shuddered as I recalled the swinging plants stopped dead the moment she entered the room, like someone reached up and grabbed them, rather than slowly watching them fade to stillness. I calmed down enough to finally close my eyes and start to doze off, when something incomprehensible shook me awake. It wasn't a physical touch or sound, but a terrible feeling, like tiny electrical shocks all over my body. And then I looked in the corner. What I saw traumatized me for life. It was a woman standing next to the door, dressed in what looked like traditional Native American regalia. Her hair was huge on the top, parted in the center, and very unkempt and matted, hanging far below her waist. Though the room was dark, her outline and detail was apparent, and the look on her face horrifically visceral. She had dead white eyes, a large beak nose, foreboding, thick black eyebrows, and her skin was pale white, luminescent in the dark. Those eyes to this day will never escape my nightmares. I was frozen, so petrified that I could only stare. Suddenly, her mouth slowly opened like she was yawning, until it stretched far beyond what a normal human could do. She looked like she was about to speak, and she slowly lifted her arm, and with her long bony finger pointed to the desk, right where the key was. I shut my eyes and screamed again. Grandma came bursting into the room so fast you'd think she was waiting in the hallway for it. She flicked on the light, looked all around the room, circling, and yelled out, "Get out of my house! Do you hear me?" Then she spotted the key. She quickly grabbed it off of the desk. "I'm going outside to bury it. Don't ever bring it in here again." I stayed in her room for the night after this, of course. For years after, I asked my grandma what that was all about and who the woman was. She never went into detail. The only thing she said to me was one particular comment, so furiously cauterized into my memory that it will be branded there for life. "You should have never found that key." Tales from the Cryptozoologist. Cryptids, a popular subject amongst horror fans everywhere, and the basis of many popular stories and movies in the mainstream media. However, these creatures we've come to know and even romanticize, take werewolves for example, are very much real and far more abundant than most people would care to realize. Oh, sorry. I tend to get a bit carried away when I type. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lily Johnson, and while most of you probably won't take my word for it, I have worked as a dedicated cryptid hunter and cryptozoologist for the past 8 years of my life. I started my work at the mere age of 18 after graduating high school, while simultaneously pursuing an education in cryptozoology in order to further expand my knowledge on these mysterious creatures, thus making me more efficient in my job. From an early age, I have loved these monsters, spending countless hours and many sleepless nights reading books about monsters, scrolling through cryptid websites and wikis, and exploring popular scary story sites such as No Sleep here on Reddit. I hope you all appreciate my attempt at a funny title, but jokes aside, all of the stories and experiences I'm about to share with you are all 100% raw and real. No fabrications, no exaggerations. This is my very real life and my experience in the world of cryptids. And spoiler alert, it is not a Twilight story. Although I will certainly be talking about vampires and werewolves, which are technically called lycanthropes. I'd like to begin by describing my first ever cryptid encounter, which I can remember like it was just yesterday, because it was the catalyst that ultimately led me into my field of work. I was only 12 years old at the time, but was already quite well acquainted with cryptids and the lore surrounding them. However, I had never actually believed in their existence. I was going for my daily evening stroll down one of the trails on my family's property and was quite deep into the forest when I heard the resounding crack of a large limb somewhere ahead of me, somewhere close. I froze. Despite my young age, I was no idiot and knew that cougars and black bears weren't uncommon in the countryside where I lived, and the last thing I wanted was to draw the attention of whatever may be lurking ahead. I fixed my hearing in the direction in which I had heard the branch snap, eyes wide and all senses heightened, to the point of hypersensitivity, eyes darting back and forth between the trees in search for any signs of movement. A few minutes passed, and I was just about to proceed down the trail when I heard another loud crack, this time accompanied by the crunching of leaves as something made its way towards me. My body began to shake in fear, and I found myself rooted in place, unable to will myself to do anything except stare in the direction of the rapidly approaching steps, praying it would not notice my presence. Just as I thought, I couldn't bear the suspense for a second longer. I saw it. The creature lumbered out of the woods, only yards from where I stood, a massive, broad-shouldered beast, covered in shaggy, matted fur, standing at least 8 feet tall. It turned towards me, and I was able to get a good look at the features of its face. Its flat, human-like features, its wide nose, and its scarily human eyes that shone with an intelligence that no bear or cougar could ever possess. I immediately recognized the beast as a Sasquatch, a real, living, breathing Sasquatch that was standing only a few feet away from me. Its stance was not threatening, nor did it appear to be threatened by me, but instead it appeared curious, just as inquisitive of me as I was of it. Once I realized it was not a direct threat to me, I relaxed, and instantly my brain switched from a state of primal fear to one of intellectual inquisition as I studied the physical features of the Sasquatch. analyzing every small detail. It was nothing like what the media had shown me. Its features were far more human than the ape-like features described by the books I'd read and countless websites I had scrolled through. Its long fur was a reddish russet color, not the dark brown I had become accustomed to, and hair covered all parts of its body aside from the face, palms, and its midsection. It gazed at me with what appeared to be compassion, and I swear I could see a small smile form at the corner of its thin lips before it turned and lumbered off into the depths of the thick woods. I stared at the spot where it had appeared in a combination of shock and awe before realizing the sun was beginning to set. As I reluctantly turned to resign to the safety of my home, I felt a surge of warmth shoot through my body, the sensation of pure, unbridled happiness, and a huge smile spread across my face as I turned the image of the magnificent creature over and over in my mind, deciding in that moment that I wanted to spend my life dedicated to studying these mysterious beasts. Now I suppose I should clarify that although I am a cryptid hunter, I do everything in my power to avoid actually killing these beasts that I have come to love so dearly, and my primary work comes in the form of research, as I am also a degree-certified cryptozoologist. In case you didn't know, cryptozoologists typically study the folklore behind cryptids and do research on various sightings and reports that have been made on them in an effort to find concrete evidence of their existence and prove to the general eye that these beasts are indeed real, living creatures. However, a select few cryptozoologists, such as myself, are able to physically study cryptids through highly classified government research facilities, be it in their natural habitat, in captivity, or on the autopsy table, and are the absolute best scientists in this field of work. I personally have a strong preference for the research aspect of my work, but I also get a thrill from hunting down cryptids in the reported cases I receive through the agency I work with, which we will simply call the agency for confidentiality purposes. In most of these cases, violence is not necessary, as many cryptids are docile by nature and generally non-threatening to humans, and they can usually be captured and relocated to more remote areas where there is no human activity. However, in more severe cases where a cryptid is exhibiting threatening and inherently violent behavior, there is no other choice but to either detain the creature or kill it, depending on the cryptid that is being dealt with. For example, Wendigos must absolutely always be killed due to their refractory and barbaric nature. I'm sure you have all heard of these ghastly creatures, the origin of Native American folklore, that has become one of the most popular cryptids in horror today. Wendigos are created when a malevolent spirit possesses a human host. They are not naturally occurring beasts and are essentially the animalistic form of a demonic possession. They are tall, emaciated figures covered in coarse dark brown to black fur that reeks of death. They have extremely long bony limbs, and their gangly fingers are tipped with knife-like claws that can rip through the hide of a deer like paper. Its head is that of a reindeer's skull. However, the front incisor and canine teeth have been replaced with long, sharp fangs that can tear through a muscle and crush bones with ease. The most defining characteristic of a Wendigo's nature is its insatiable hunger and particular fondness for human flesh. Because Wendigos are spirits inhabiting a human body, they are unable to properly digest food, and whatever their stomach is unable to process is regurgitated. Wendigos also enjoy the act of killing and will often kill solely for the thrill of the hunt, as well as to satiate the malevolent motivation that drives the creature's very existence. Not only are these beasts extremely dangerous, they are also notoriously difficult to kill. The only way to kill a Wendigo is to either shoot or stab them directly in the heart with pure silver. You must also burn the creature's body after killing it, using gasoline has proven to be most efficient, because slaughtering the beast only destroys its physical body, not the spirit that drives it. Therefore, if you do not burn the body, the spirit will simply exit its current vessel and move on to the next available host. I'll get deeper into my experiences with Wendigos in later updates, and I'll introduce you all to some of the more obscure creatures that I have dealt with over the past several years. But I think I'm going to end this first entry here. If you guys have any more questions about me and what I do, don't hesitate to ask me in the comments. And if there are any specific cryptids you would like me to discuss in future updates, feel free to drop those as well. I'll be looking forward to hearing from you all. And until next time, stay safe, my fellow creepers. Rural upbringing. My grandparents are full-blooded Cherokee. They raised me in the country, in a particularly wooded area of northeast Oklahoma. They often spoke Cherokee if they were talking only amongst themselves, and I always loved to hear them do so, but not on every occasion. I didn't like to hear them speak it after dark. During the day, it was a wonderful place to be a child. Go in the canyon with the dogs, or play in the barnyard with broke-down cars, or tease and run from the livestock. It was such an incredibly stark contrast to the night. The night, for Native Americans, has always been a serious and respected time. It has always given cause to be wary. We never left our blinds open at night, ever. Grandma would say it was because you didn't want something looking in. Grandpa would say it was because you wouldn't want to see what was looking in. Both were good enough reasons. The animals outside would sometimes go into a loud and furious fit. They didn't always tear off to chase after what caused this. Sometimes they'd just sit outside and growl and bark. If I asked what was wrong, my grandparents told me something was bothering them. If I asked what it was, they told me it was something bad and that it was time for bed. They'd turn off the TV and Grandma would stop reading or sewing, and they would talk in Cherokee, very little at a time, like they were talking about what was happening outside. I'd been warned not to play out after dark because it tempted these things to come and play with me. I was told never to go looking for them because sometimes they would follow a person home, and sometimes when that happened, they followed them wherever they went for good. I was afraid of the dark, absolutely terrified of the night. All Cherokees know of these things and how they are very real. Stories get shared often, and it doesn't surprise anybody. I'm not afraid of the sun going down now. that I live in a city, only in the woods. My grandpa always told me that one of the worst things that can bother you is something that stays on your roof. It's an especially bad thing because it knows you're home and it's waiting for you to leave your house. Whatever it is, it's very heavy, and it keeps walking from one end of the roof to the other. It walks like an animal. My blinds are closed and my doors are locked, but I can barely breathe, and my heart is beating too fast. I can't move, and when I tried to wake my wife, I could only whisper. The young ones. The tranquility was beautiful at the base of the mountain. I'm not sure which one I was at the base of. Maybe it didn't have a name. I was reading short story books and drinking from my flask when the scream cut my peace like a knife. I was a 5-mile hike from anywhere and not on any beaten path, but that was a woman's scream, not any wild animals. Unfortunately, my conscience got the better of me, like it usually did. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and set out in the direction the scream had come from. If some hiker had just hurt herself, I couldn't just leave her to die. Fear almost got the best of me as I jogged through the pine forest. I almost turned back, but the scream came again, and it was worse this time. It trailed off in a sickening gurgle, but it was closer. When I stepped out of the tree line, I finally saw it. The cave was dark, its entry hanging open like the maw of some great beast. I shook my head. I was reading too many stories. There was probably some girl in there spelunking, and she'd broken an ankle or something, and here I was getting freaked out by a cave. I rounded up my resolve and stepped through. And there she was, just like I expected, her straw blonde hair pulled tight in a ponytail, her thin frame covered by a blood-stained yellow t-shirt. Her hazel eyes darted around in panic. As I got closer, I realized this girl was in desperate need of a bath. She smelled like holy hell. How long had she been out here? She looked like she was trying to speak. As I ran to her and knelt down. "Oh, thank God someone came." Her voice was high-pitched, almost childlike. I put a hand on her shoulder, trying to ignore the stench. "Are you okay? Can you walk? I have a campsite not far from here." I was kicking myself for not thinking to bring my first aid kit, but it was too late to worry about that. She let out a small cough and nodded. "I think so, but I'll need your help." Before long, we were back at my camp. I sat her in my folding chair and handed her one of my many short story books. I checked the title, Skinwalkers and Other Native American Legends. She took it happily and started to read as I set about bandaging her wounds. But it didn't take long for confusion to set in. For all the blood, I couldn't find a scratch on her. She flipped a page and chuckled. Not the high-pitched girlish voice from before, something else. "You know, we're not all these jerky moving, barely speaking idiots, right?" She sneered as she flipped another page, her eyes now devoid of color, pure white spheres, too large for her face. "That's just the young ones." The strange figures. I'm part Native American and grew up looking into our folklore. I ended up fearing the woods, especially the ones facing my grandma's house. They always felt strange. The first time One day my cousin took me into the woods. We wanted to look for a cat with our neighbor. We walked until we came across a hole. Thorn bushes and vines made it quite hard to get into. It was pretty big, but wasn't connected to any other water source. There were chairs, gold, and an old scratched-up picture. We tried to get in to take the picture, but we found it pretty much impossible. We went back home and told our family, but they never believed us. The second time. A year or two later, my aunt took me into the woods. I was extremely bored and was bothering her. We walked for maybe 5 minutes. The more we walked, the more my head hurt. We kept walking until we reached an old cabin. My head was pounding, and I felt physically sick. My aunt gasped, and when I looked over there was a weird deer. It stood up on its hind legs and looked malnourished. My aunt told me to look at the beautiful deer. I started sobbing and telling her we had to go back home. The minute we got out of the woods, my head stopped hurting. A week after this, a bear lunged at me out of nowhere and disappeared, leaving me with just a scraped knee. The third time, I went to go pick berries that were right outside the woods. It was about to storm, but I really wanted these yummy raspberries. A weird creature came out of the bushes. It was malnourished, and the sound that came out of it was unholy. It was human-like and had some dark splotchy hair on its head. I ran faster than I ever thought I could. I remember sobbing and shaking. My little brother went outside to see what had spooked me so bad. He screamed and also ran inside. We ended up hiding in a closet with knives. All of these happened in my childhood. I'm almost 18 and had a dream. This fucking thing was in my dream. It didn't say a thing, but you could feel its aura. I felt like I was unable to escape. I would run, but it would catch up and take a chunk of flesh off of me. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. When I woke up, I was in intense pain and had to be calmed down by my cat. My cat was hissing at something, unable to be seen. Watching for Wendigos. "Don't aim between the eyes, Princess," he said. I peered through the night scope at the shapes coming out of the woods. Their brain pan is short, like a bear's. If you hit him between the eyes, you'll just part his hair and piss him off. Aim for the nose. Months ago, something changed. Wendigos weren't hunting solo anymore. Instead, they were hunting in packs. They got my mom and my little brother within just a few days of each other. That happened only 3 weeks ago, and I still remember about my mother screaming for help. I didn't dream of my brother. I just saw him everywhere, blood in his hair, frightened tears running down his cheeks. The Wendigos surrounded my mother on 3 sides. The only way for her to run was toward the side of the house, where there was no door. They backed her up and overcame her. My brother was just too far from the house. 2 Wendigos knocked him down and ripped him apart. Following that, Dad and I lived in a metal bunker. During daytime, it was safe to go out and collect wood or water or empty buckets of whatever. We had plenty of ammo and 3 rifles. At night, We would turn off the lantern and put out any lit candles. Then we would sit by the gun slits and watch for Wendigos. After I watched one night, he said I was ready to start shooting. I balanced my rifle in the gun slit and watched through the scope. More Wendigos were slinking out of the woods. The radio Dad left on in the house had their attention, but one of the Wendigos lifted his snout to smell. He probably could smell my scent wafting out of the bunker. I had his nose in the crosshairs. The blast knocked me down. I sprang up to see a crumpled body and Wendigos looking first at the body, then at the bunker. Dad got the next one. My next shot only staggered me a moment. Dad shot again. Wendigos can move fast, but 2 shooters, alternating shooting and loading, can bring down an easy dozen. We killed every member of that pack. In the morning, we got the small tractor out of the barn and stacked the dead bodies. We burned them, the pillar of smoke rising like a smoke signal to any other Wendigo pack. Come here. Die here. That was my last summer with Dad. I was 14 years old. I learned how to shoot, how to drive, how to stack 'em and burn 'em. I show no mercy, because when I was 14 years old, Wendigos followed my dad to town and tore him to pieces. Daylight didn't save him. Nightfall won't save them. Nothing will save them. I can cry and drive, bringing extinction with me.